Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 11th WECO Travel webinar. My name is Judith Szabó. I am the head of sales for WECO Travel Hungary, and today I'm going to be your host. Please let me introduce you also my guest, Mr. Matt Curlew, First Secretary at the British Embassy here in Budapest. Thank you, Matt, for accepting our invitation and participating in the webinar. Matt is a diplomat holding the position of the First Secretary at the British Embassy to Hungary in Budapest and leads the team responsible for various reports and updates to London, which includes travel advice for British citizens traveling to Hungary. And Matt has 9 years of experience in the UK civil service, beginning within the UK's Ministry of Defence before moving to the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Matt's role have been many and varied, from research and analysis to open source data and policy delivery. Matt holds a BA in history and an MSc in security, conflict and international development. Before we start, I would like to kindly ask you that if you have any question, please put it in the Q&A section, which you can find at the bottom of your screen in the middle with a Q&A description. So, Matt, let's jump into the middle because we have a lot to talk about regarding the UK, taking into account that not only Brexit is a huge change for you and also for us between the two countries' relationships and everything, but also the pandemic, which just started last year, has raised a lot of new questions about travel, about stay in the United Kingdom, about work in the United Kingdom as a Hungarian citizen. So let's start with the pandemic, with COVID-19. Where does the country stand in terms of the vaccination program? Is there a fear of a new wave, or what can we know now about the situation in the UK?
Thank you, and yeah, let's jump straight in. So I think in terms of where we stand at the moment, so in the UK, there have been we're approximately 80% fully vaccinated, and that includes everybody over the age of 12. Has had their full vaccine, and then if we look at those who've had just one vaccine, it's 88%. So we've got quite a high vaccination rate in the UK at the moment, and that continues to go up quite quickly. In the last few months, cases have been increasing, matching the trend that's happening in of course wider Europe. We registered at the last count, I'm just double checking to get the latest figures, it was 38,263 cases. And in the last day, unfortunately, within 28 days of a COVID diagnosis, the death rate was 201. Now, so that's an around 140, that's a 7-day average of around 140 deaths daily. Now, in terms of what it looks like, of course, these things are difficult to predict and anticipate. But given that we've got a fairly high vaccination rate, and we're not noticing, as was the case in the first waves, the link between the number of cases and a high number of hospitalizations, the high number of people on ventilators, and then unfortunately the high number of people that died. That link has been not entirely severed, but certainly reduced. But yes, in terms of a fear of a new wave, this is difficult to anticipate. We're seeing, obviously observing the situation that's happening in Europe at the moment and watching it, but we can't anticipate that at this stage.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's really hard to predict anything in the current situation. So what are the current rules for entering the UK?
So currently, the traffic light system that we had that was in effect has been removed. In addition to requiring just visitors to complete a passenger locator form, if you're fully vaccinated when you arrive in England, after you arrive, you must take a COVID-19 test on day 2. That must be booked before you travel, and you need a number which comes with that booking, a reference number for the test, to complete your passenger locator form. the test that's required is no longer a PCR test. It is now a COVID-19 antigen test or lateral flow test. That is a significant development. Of course, it was quite costly to get a PCR test, so now that cost is reduced. If you are not fully vaccinated, when you arrive in England, before you travel, you have to take a COVID-19 test, and that must be taken in the 3 days before you travel. You must then book and pay for a day 2 and a day 8 PCR tests, so not a lateral flow test, it must be a PCR test. And after arrival, quarantine at home for 10 full days, and then you take the pre-booked C19 PCR test. That's if you are not fully vaccinated.
Okay, yeah, a lot has been changed then since the start, let's say. And how do you see, will there be further restrictions, stricter measures put in place, or it's also hard to say it now? It's a day by day or week by week decision.
Of course, these things are routinely reviewed in the UK depending upon the situation, and so the statistics that we'll be able to see, and the government's decision. So we can't anticipate that at the moment. It just depends on the data and the statistics and the situation.
It's clear. Does the UK accept the EU vaccination pass? Are you checking the jab type at the border? Are there any vaccine types you are not accepting, like the Russian or the Chinese, or what should we know about that?
Good questions, and of course, this varies country to country. And I think the UK now accepts the EU COVID certificate as a valid COVID certificate. At the moment, the UK only accepts the vaccinations which have been accepted by the EMA. And Hungary has been providing the Sputnik V, or the Russian vaccine, and Sinopharm, the Chinese jabs, to citizens here. These are not accepted when entering the UK. However, from 4 a.m. on the 22nd of November, the World Health Organization's emergency use listing, or the WHO's EUL, vaccines are going to be accepted. This includes Sinovac, the Sinopharm Beijing vaccine. It's very important that it's the Beijing vaccine, and Covaxin. So those are the current rules at the moment.
So the Sputnik V, it's not acceptable right now. Still, okay.
No, it's not accepted. It's not listed under the World Health Organization. Okay. It's not accepted by the EMA. So. Yeah.
Sure. You mentioned these test types, and that they have to register the number of the second day test on the PLF, the passenger locator form. So what happens if someone tests positive on the second day of their stay in the UK? What happens in that case?
So if the test result is positive for your lateral flow test, or your antigen test, if you've booked that and the result is positive, you must take a PCR test to confirm the result. That's the first stage. You must self-isolate until you get the result of that PCR test. Now, if the result of that PCR test is positive, you must self-isolate for 10 full days. The day you took the lateral flow test is day 0, not day 1, day 0. And members of your household may be asked to self-isolate along with you as well. Now, if you test positive after a PCR test, so those who are not fully vaccinated have to take a PCR test when they arrive in the UK. If you test positive, you must self-isolate for 10 full days. The day of the test counts as 0, and again, members of your household may be asked to self-isolate, as was the case with the other tests.
Yeah, that's clear. And with the rapidly increasing number of cases, I mean, here in Hungary, at least, what rules might apply to Hungarian travelers in case of a possible change of country classification? Because we just heard, that from Germany and the Netherlands, that they put Hungary into the red list, let's say. So what can we expect in terms of the United Kingdom?
Again, this is hard to anticipate or predict. I mean, it's possible that the current not fully vaccinated rule would apply to everyone. And before you travel, taking a COVID-19 test, the 3 days before you travel, booking and paying for a day 2 and a day 8 test, and then quarantining at home after arrival, and taking the pre-booked tests. That could be possible. That would essentially be a sort of rollback to where we were. Around a year or so, or actually even a few months ago. I think that is what we would do, but again, this is difficult to anticipate, and it would be subject to the situation at the time.
Sure, of course, we were interested only about your opinion, because you are there, so maybe you have a wider picture to see. What are local rules and regulations apply currently in terms of events or visiting restaurants, cultural, leisure sites in the UK?
So the UK government lifted most restrictions for England on the 19th of July of this year, and the Scottish and Welsh governments did the same. And for Scotland and Wales on the 8th and the 9th and the 7th of August respectively. Now, the Northern Ireland Executive also lifted most of the restrictions on the 16th of August of this year, although some restrictions on meeting indoors at home do remain in place. Some places may ask for the NHS COVID pass as a condition of entry.
For example, because here in Hungary, you might know that on the public transportation, there is a mask wearing obligation. So in the UK, the public transportation is just the same. So no need to wear anything or do anything. You can freely travel on the public transportation.
So it depends where you are. So all of this is decided at a local level. So England legislate for it differently to Scotland, differently to Wales and Northern Ireland. So that's why I mentioned those different dates earlier. By way of example, in London on TfL, on Transport for London, all services you have to wear a face mask. But that is not the case in every city in England.
Yes, that's what my next question refers to, that if there is any difference in the regulations between the different parts of the country, and if yes, do you have a plan to unify them, or as you said, it's local decisions, so they are not willing to or not open to unify these regulations?
So of course, when these regulations are discussed at a national level, then leaders of each of the assemblies and parliaments would discuss it and will try and pull it essentially in the same direction. But these are all legislated by local governments. So it's not mandatory, and there's no intention for the future, at least, to sort of take a combined approach. Every country has its own right to set its own rules.
What applies for business travelers? Do they have any exemptions, for example, with these 2nd and 8 days testing, or every traveler is in under one cap and no differentiators, no exemptions?
So there are no separate entry regulations and therefore exemptions for business travellers. Everyone has to follow the same regulations, which are based on your vaccination status. The only listed exemptions from the restrictions are mentioned on our travel advice guidance page. If you search for coronavirus COVID-19 travellers exempt from the UK border rules, you'll find it on gov.uk website.
So I'm just checking if we have any question regarding this part, because basically about the pandemic, we have these most important questions and parts, but I cannot see anything in a Q&A. Maybe on a later stage, our audience will ask something that we missed out. But let's move to the post-Brexit travel rules, let's say. So as a first step, in what sense has Brexit changed the bilateral relations between Hungary and UK?
So Brexit has brought changes in how we do things with our European partners. For example, we're no longer part of EU institutions, so we need to find ways to cooperate differently. But it has brought opportunities, and the fact that the UK has left the EU does not mean that we don't want to remain committed partners and allies to our friends on the continent. It's of crucial interest for us to continue to strengthen our bilateral relationships with EU member states, including with Hungary. The UK and Hungary have got a very long history, shared history of cooperation and friendship, and our people-to-people links are particularly strong. We've got more than 150,000 Hungarians making their home in the UK. There are three particular areas of mutual interest that we're concentrating on, I should say: foreign policy, defence and security. We've got a lot of common interests and shared challenges in defence, security and foreign policy, and we continue to work hard to enhance bilateral dialogue, cooperation and joint working. Our defence relationship is growing, and we've witnessed joint working on cybersecurity, reserves and cadets, and a significant upturn in knowledge sharing and education. On prosperity, Hungary and the UK are close trade and investment partners. Following our departure from the EU, the UK is Hungary's primary non-EU trading partner. The UK is also an important investor in Hungary, having a market share of 2.6% for goods and services. And there are more than 1,000 UK businesses that are either present in Hungary or contributed to trade with Hungary during the last financial year alone, employing more than 55,000 people here in Hungary. We also work closely with Hungary to achieve our ambitious climate goals. On the people-to-people side, we've got, as I said before, we've got really strong people-to-people links with growing ties at every level, not just between our ministers and capitals, but right across the spectrum, between individuals, between businesses, universities and civil society. And we work together with a diverse range of stakeholders to promote universal values such as human rights, diversity and inclusion. And we regularly work together with the Hungarian Jewish community to promote UK policies on freedom of religion and belief. And we're also a keen supporter of disability rights. In addition to all of these areas, we also continue to work together on tackling the continuing threat of COVID-19.
Yeah, wow, the numbers were very impressive, and that's good to hear that basically nothing has really changed in big ways, let's say. But what has changed, if anything has changed in terms of the entry requirements due to Brexit? Because, for example, if I remember well, I read somewhere that it will be not enough to hold our identity card, but it will be necessary to have the passport, a valid passport, to enter into the United Kingdom. And are you expecting further changes? What should we know about that?
So for short-term stays, that's travel for leisure or for business purposes, there's been limited change as a result of Brexit. So EU, EEA and Swiss citizens can travel to the UK for holidays or short trips without the requirement of a visa. In most cases, people can stay for up to 6 months. They may participate in a wide range of activities, including business-related activities like meetings, events and conferences. They may enter the UK multiple times during that period, but they may not live in the UK by means of frequent or successive visits. EU, EEA and Swiss nationals can cross the UK border using a passport which should be valid for the whole time of their stay in the UK. But, and please note this, in most cases, ID cards are no longer accepted at the border. We only accept the ID card for certain categories of people, for example, those with settled or pre-settled status under the EU settlement scheme. EU, EEA and Swiss citizens can continue to use automated e-passport gates to pass through the border on arrival.
So what does it mean for the Hungarian nationals in terms of, you mentioned the leisure and business parts, but you may also know that we have a lot of friends who are working in the United Kingdom currently. So what kind of rules will apply for those who would like to work in the United Kingdom as a Hungarian national?
Sure. So for business travellers, going back to that, if you're an EU, EEA or Swiss citizen travelling to the UK, you won't need to apply for a visa and you can stay for up to 6 months. And you can participate in all of those activities I mentioned earlier, including business related activities like meetings, events and conferences. As a business visitor, you can't do paid or unpaid work for a company or as a self-employed person. You can't work or do a work placement or internship. Or sell you cannot sell directly to the public or provide goods and services. We've got a lot of guidance available on gov.uk to help travellers and for those who are interested in working and settling in the UK, and we're happy to share those after the webinar if that's of interest.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And are you expecting a decrease of EU tourists to the UK because of the Brexit, or are there any, analyses or reports what you expect in terms of tourists from the EU?
So no, if we receive fewer tourists, we expect that would be as a result of COVID, but not Brexit. Mainly because, as I said before, rules have not really changed for most people coming to the UK, except for the requirement to have a valid passport instead of an ID card. Otherwise, the UK remains just as open as it has been, as a welcoming country, and it's one of the top tourist and business destinations of Europe, and that will not change because of Brexit.
That's good to hear. And this is the same question regarding business travelers. But as you mentioned, I am sure there is no change in this way as well. But do you expect or do you see any decrease of the business travelers or commuters because of the Brexit?
No, not really. The same reasons I mentioned before. In most cases, Brexit has had no effect on business travel whatsoever.
That's really nice and great to hear. So actually, as much as I see, we did not receive any questions, but I let still some minutes to our audience if they have any questions to put it on the wall. Until then, I don't know if you have any other thoughts or things you would like to share with us, if you have any. Matt?
No, nothing further. I think we've covered all of the bases. Provided you follow the guidance, the UK is open.
That's great. So if nobody has any question, then I will thank you, Matt, for your participation and for this detailed information you shared with us regarding these two main topics. And to our audience, if you would like to receive any news from us regarding travel regulations and safety restrictions, you can subscribe to our newsletter, and you will receive a questionnaire after the webinar, how you'd like it. If you have any ideas you would like to hear on the next webinar, maybe. And you can also follow us on the social media platforms where we share week by week interesting and important news from the travel and event industry. And you can also download our Weco Video application, where we also share these news day by day and week by week. So thank you for coming, and thank you to our audience for listening us today, and see you on the next time. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.